There are no limits when you're as brilliant as Seto Kaiba. I have never settled for mediocrity as an acceptable standard, and neither should you.
You know, one of my slam dunks from last year was when I talked about rivals in video games, and I think it's important to understand that rivals aren't just in video games. Thanks, Captain Obvious. And nothing of value was lost. Back on topic, while this channel has become a hotbed for mostly talking about video games, if you've been keeping an eye on my channel, I've slowly been moving into talking about anime. That isn't to say I'm gonna move away from games. I love games, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Is one of my favorite games of all time. Talking about rivals, you know there's only one guy we gotta talk about with this topic when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh!
And so what is his rival's name? It's K-I-K-A-I-B-A, Kaiba or something.
No, well, yes, but not really. We're talking about Seto Kaiba and how he's probably one of the best rivals in all of fiction. Yeah, you heard me right. What are you gonna do about it? You gonna throw a case of money at me to make me shut up? I'd actually appreciate that, really. But in any case, let's screw the rules and pretend we have money. It's time to duel. I'm MangaKamen, and this is Seto Kaiba. For the dregs who don't know the glory that is Seto Kaiba, he happens to be the main rival in the anime Yu-Gi-Oh! And if you don't know what Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, well, I can't help you with that. Seto Kaiba is the CEO of the Kaiba Corporation, a multinational gaming conglomerate who has created holographic technology that allow things like the Duelist to be a thing. And in a world where the entire culture is revolving around a card game, that's pretty good marketing. Seto was an orphan who had a younger brother named Mokuba, who was probably more of a damsel in distress than the actual girls in the show. The two were adopted by Gozaburo Kaiba, the previous CEO of Kaiba Corp, after Kaiba kicked his ass in a game of chess. In the manga it's said that he cheated, but in the anime, not so much. And then later, Gozaburo jumped out a window after Seto took his company from him. Or if we're talking the anime, Gozaburo became a computer program and was... You know what, that's not really important, it's filler. Life for Seto wasn't easy, even after being adopted. Gozaburo worked Seto like a dog, collar included. So I don't feel bad for the old man who jumped out the window. And hey, for what it's worth, Seto becoming a CEO, a rich boy who has the ability to spend enough money to get an actual jet that's based off the Blue Eyes White Dragon, all at the age of 16. The guy's egotistical, snobby, rude, lusts for power, in a children's card game, and tends to be a no-nonsense guy. And here's the thing, he totally earned it. Seto's got a career that anyone would kill for at such a young age, has millions of dollars to his name that keeps on growing, is a genius inventor and programmer, has a kick-ass style for some reason the PlayStation 5 wanted to emulate, and at one point even commanded the power of a god himself. If anyone has an ego, it's the guy who can easily write a check for a sports car and just drive off the lot within 5 minutes. Fun fact, Seto Kaiba was actually based upon an actual person that the Yu-Gi-Oh! Creator, Kazuki Takahashi, actually asked to teach him how to play some card games, only to be turned away and told, "Come back when you have collected 10,000 cards." This honestly pissed off Kazuki, but then he thought, yeah, that'd be an awesome character. And initially, Kaiba was just going to be an heir to a gaming company, and would challenge Yugi to different games that he would continuously come up with. But at the last moment, Kazuki decided to have Kaiba face against Yugi in Duel Monsters. I've said this in previous videos, but the card game really took the attention of the readers, and it's why most of a good portion of the original manga, when it came to just focusing on Yugi using various games to solve the problems of the chapter, slowly crept into becoming more and more about the card game. One could say if it wasn't for Kaiba here, we wouldn't have the same Yu-Gi-Oh! That we all know and love today. Hell, he was originally just going to be a one-off villain too, but he was so popular in the manga that he got brought back and started the Death Tea arc. And in Season 0, he was an overarching villain of that series. So when Kaiba took Yugi's grandpa's Blue Eyes White Dragon card and ripped it in two, he essentially ripped Yu-Gi-Oh! A new one and changed the manga. Of course, it was the card game itself that drew more and more attention to the series, but Kaiba was the first character to really challenge Yugi in the game. And hey, if we go with Duel Monsters' anime version of events, which is kind of messy since Season 0 events do kind of matter for the sake of the plot, Kaiba is the one who kicks off the entire plot. More notably, his defeat does, since it draws the attention of Pegasus to Yugi, and then the Millennium Puzzle. Now, since we have a good idea of who Seto Kaiba is, why is he a good example of a rival? There's always been a bit of a debate on whether or not Kaiba is a rival or anti-hero. After all, when he was introduced in any variation of Yugioh, whether it be the original manga, Season 0, where he had green hair for some reason, or the Duel Monsters anime, he was an antagonist. Despite his riches or such, he had to essentially steal an extremely rare card from a kid half his size, or from an old man who got a heart attack from the holograms of monsters that Kaiba created. There was darkness in his heart, which coincidentally turned out to be a fat clown, but when that was mind crushed out of his heart, Kaiba did change. Kaiba does see Yugi as a worthy opponent. After all, Yugi did something that no other duelist up to that point managed to accomplish, and that was to summon Exodia, the Forbidden One, and defeat was essentially, at the time, the strongest cards in the game. God, if only Kaiba could see the IRL game today. But the thing about Kaiba was that he was a good duelist. He was the original champion of Duel Monsters until he got defeated by Yugi, and ever since then, Kaiba does have a respect for Yugi, and yet at the same time, knows his priorities. Let's take for example the iconic duel at Duelist Kingdom's castle. This is probably one of the worst things as Kaiba has done after his redemption, and that's to threaten his own life should he lose the duel against Yugi. The reason he was willing to do so was because it was the only chance for Kaiba to get his kidnapped brother Mokuba back. Was it scummy? Yes. But it shows that Kaiba was willing to do whatever it takes to get his brother back, and he even acknowledges that his duel with Yugi didn't count at the end of the Duelist Kingdom arc. To me, this proves two things about Kaiba, that he's got his own pride as a duelist, but at the same time, he's willing to put his pride aside in order to make sure to protect the ones he truly cares about. I've talked about rivals on this channel a lot, and I've brought up how it's important for a rival to push the other member of the duo to the max, but we also have to remember the human element to characters like this. For Kaiba to perform such an act to make sure his only living family member is safe really speaks to his character. And as a rival too, since while his rivalry with Yugi is important to him, one could argue that Kaiba's quite obsessed with his rivalry. He knows at the end of the day, this is a card game, and family comes first to him. It's a trait that even Yugi acknowledges right after Kaiba steals that victory before Kaiba's about to challenge Pegasus. Now, if Kaiba wants to get back his crown and really trounce Yugi, he's gotta do it with style. So we probably come to the best arc in Yu-Gi-Oh! Battle City. It's the tournament that Kaiba himself set up just so he could use an Egyptian god to trounce Yugi, and get another god card. Hell, he even made a new rule set for this tournament that was made for almost every other Yu-Gi-Oh! Series up until Vrains. Think about it. He sets up an entire city to be the grounds for a tournament just so he could have another chance to beat Yugi and make it into a spectacle. He's obviously going full-on obsessive mode here for this. Because when you really think about this, the amount of money to essentially pull this off would be insane. Then again, considering how duel discs are very sophisticated equipment, it's possible that it was more of an investment. Now, if you're familiar with this arc, you know there's a villainous group called the Rare Hunters who kidnapped a number of important characters that were significant to Kaiba and Yugi, Mokuba, as well as Joey Wheeler and Taya Gardner. In order to save the three, Kaiba and Yugi joined forces and even tag teamed against Lumos and Umbra in order to find out where the kidnapped characters are. But here's the rub. Mokuba is able to escape from his captors and meets up with Kaiba and Yugi, and Kaiba helps Yugi get to his friends and even aids in the rescue. The point that I'm making here is that while Kaiba is definitely an antagonist at the beginning of the series, that can't be argued. He slowly began to transition to a more genuine rival, and I'd even argue more so that he isn't an anti-hero either. Can Kaiba be crass and rude?
And anyone who's late for registration will be disqualified. Mokuba, make sure Wheeler's late.
Yes, and entertainingly so. But just because someone is rude, it doesn't automatically mean that they're an anti-hero or even a villain. I do need to be upfront. A lot of this crass attitude comes from the dub side of things, so it's more adaptational than anything else. Kaiba has his obsession with defeating the Pharaoh, even more so when we get to the dark side dimensions where the guy is essentially trying to find a way to get to the afterlife just so he can settle the score with the king. However, that doesn't prevent him from being an actual human, wanting to make sure that his brother is safe, but also not allowing his ego to get in the way of making sure that others aren't hurt if he can't help it. I mean, he's not going out to be Kaiba Man and become a superhero, but I think you're getting my point. Also, if you need another reason for me to at least say that he isn't exactly an anti-hero, in the original manga, when Yugi was doing a mind-controlled Joey, and when Joey goes in to save Yugi from drowning, and Joey forgot his key to unlock his own lock. Kaiba's the one who drops the key into the water so Joey and Yugi don't die. I know that's a change from the original anime, but I really think this was a strange change, really. And before that, when Kaiba learned how exactly demented this whole duel was, where either Joey or Yugi would die by being dragged into the water by an anchor, he was rushing to stop the duel, but only stopped when Mokuba was being held hostage. Again. And when his brother was no longer a hostage, Kaiba immediately runs to help the two. If that's still not enough, Kaiba in the manga actually acknowledges Joey as a decent duelist. I appreciate the anime's English dub and how almost everything Kaiba says can be golden.
3-on-1 up there!
I see you can count. Unfortunately, numbers aren't everything.
But we missed a lot of good scenes of Kaiba's development, and how I see him more as a rival than an anti-hero. Now you may be wondering, how does this make him a good rival? Ah, that's where the magic begins, my friends. Shock of all shocks, this isn't going to be something new that I've stated on the channel before, but a good rival needs to be acting as a foil to the main characters. For those who aren't familiar with the term foil, it essentially means being a contrast to another character. Kaiba essentially does that for about 3 of the main characters. Well, 4 if you want to count Merrick, since they both have elements of abuse in their backstories, but that's beside the point. The 3 characters are Yugi, Atem, and Joey, and Kaiba acts as a foil to each of them. Let's back up a little bit and discuss Kaiba's background with a little more detail. Kaiba is obsessed with winning, and while in the anime it's not pushed to an extreme detail, in the manga, when his adoptive father loses his company and commits suicide, there's a line that gets stuck in Kaiba's head. To lose means to die. Kaiba, being raised in such a harsh environment and being abused, being tortured into becoming an heir for Gozaburo, had this lesson beaten into his very soul. It's a belief that Kaiba has. It created his obsession with winning, as any and all conflict is essentially a game, and only victory matters. Hell, that section where I brought up how Kaiba was willing to jump off the castle in order to win was a mirror to Gozaburo's actions. This is in stark contrast with Yugi. In the manga, Yugi didn't have many friends in the beginning, with the exception of Taya. He wasn't good at sports, he was a short guy, really all he had to him was his games and his hair. His perfectly coiffed hair. Games were a means for Yugi to actually find comfort. In the Millennium Puzzle, a game in and of itself was said to grant a wish of Yugi when he solved it, and he wanted friends. And he got them. Yugi saw the games he played, even Duel Monsters itself, as just that, a game. And even when he gets his grandpa's card in the manga stolen, Yugi still gives Kaiba a chance to return it. Yugi genuinely loves games and sees them as a value to make friends and enjoy life. Meanwhile, Kaiba sees them as much more cold and calculated, to the point where even cheating at them just to get ahead is perfectly fine to do so if you can get ahead in life. It's how he got adopted by a Gozaburo. Then there's Atem, the Pharaoh, Yami Yugi. Eventually, Kaiba came to the realization it was actually the Pharaoh who defeated him and not Yugi himself. Going back to the backstories, the Pharaoh was of royalty. He had everything at his fingertips, was even given the powers of the Egyptian gods back when he was reigning in the sands of Egypt. There's also the fact that Kaiba himself admits that the reason for why he wants to defeat the Pharaoh is to destroy the past. We learned this in Battle City Finals, where Kaiba wanted to burn his past away. It's why he destroys his father's island after the finals, and that was what he was attempting to reclaim his title from Yugi, since that was one of his few black marks in his duelist career. It's a direct contrast to the Pharaoh's quest to learn everything about his past, regaining his memories. I don't think I need to explain why one who wants to burn his past while another wants to embrace the past are opposites and can be used as a foil to each other as rivals. And finally, Joey Wheeler, the godfather of games! This is also related to the past, but more so because unlike Yugi or Atem, both Kaiba and Joey were raised by terrible fathers. Joey's being a drunk, meanwhile Kaiba's was a tycoon who was willing to jump out a window when he lost his company to the kid he adopted. Hell, how they reacted to Yugi's kindness was also interesting. Considering that the initial chapters of the manga, Joey was a bully even to the point of tossing one of Yugi's Millennium Puzzle pieces out into a river. But after an act of kindness, Joey immediately became Yugi's friend and returned the piece. In comparison, Kaiba pretended to be Yugi's friend, and even though he stole from Yugi as well, Yugi gave Kaiba a second chance to return the stolen card. And what does Kaiba do? smacked Yugi in the face with his card case, which, funny enough, is becoming a product you can buy soon. So you too can store your cards in style and assault teenagers after you steal their cards. Scubber, do not do this. Even their personalities are polar opposite. Joey tends to be friendly with a hot-headed streak, meanwhile most of the time Kaiba is calm but cold-hearted. So if you really think about it, Kaiba can be a very dynamic rival for a good majority of the main cast of Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's really important when you're making a rival character, since it's important that the rivals have conflictions, even when they come to their design, when they come to their backstories, or even how they want to handle things. And yet, as I've shown earlier in the video, Kaiba isn't a heartless bastard. Yeah, he's crass, and while his origins were obviously villainous, and him being a complete jackass, the fact of the matter was that he was always trying to stop the duel of death between Yugi and Joey, and even helped save Joey in a situation shows that he's more of a rival who was slowly getting more respect to the guy he usually called a mutt. Now, this is all well and good, and as a rival, Kaiba fits the pieces for a series that has a lot of potential for rivals in it. And I'm not the only one who thinks this. Even Eric Stewart himself, the guy who voices Kaiba in the original English dub, agrees with this notion of Kaiba being more of a rival.
What's so interesting about this character in particular is some people think he's a villain. I really think of him as a rival. And I think Kaiba's role is to keep pushing Yugi to be the best, which also gives him the depth he needs. If he were truly just a villain, he would be evil, and he's not. We can see that all of those years of wanting to be the best has definitely affected him. And so I wanted to give him a little bit more of an edge, but still stay consistent to his character.
But you can have all the right pieces to make a great rival, but it's worthless if they're boring, right? Well, good thing Seto Kaiba ain't boring! Seto Kaiba is probably one of the greatest anime characters of all time, and a lot of that comes from the English dub of the anime. Eric Stewart does a really great job of playing the role of the character.
Blah, blah, blah. Don't you get tired of making the same speech every time you're faced with a challenge? Stop saving the world and get a hobby!
Not bad for the original Pokemon's Brock.
I play my trap! Dark Sacrifice gives your knives a new monster to mince!
It's pretty much a well-known fact that Kaiba is a different character in not only the manga, but also between the sub and dub versions of the anime adaptations. And frankly, each version of him is dynamic, whether it be the Japanese version with the epic voice acting from Kenjiro Suda, or the developmental evolution of his character in the manga, or the badass non-magic believing CEO of the dub that makes him out to be. The presentation and implementation of Kaiba's character in any version is entertaining. Like, you have to be a badass to stop a gun from firing by blocking the hammer of the gun with a card. Kaiba's probably got some of the better action set pieces in the entire show and manga simply because of how much of a badass this guy is. And the English dub really dials up the arrogance of the guy to a 12. His condescending attitude is pretty much iconic for the entire series, and really hasn't been topped in that regard since then. Not bad for about 25 years at this point if you ask me. But we can talk about a ton of the awesome stuff he does, like Kaiba having a jet in the shape of a blue eyes white dragon, or when he decided to throw Mokuba. You know, for tossing a kid with one arm all the while running to get to a blimp, Kaiba's got some really good upper body strength. What really makes Kaiba compelling as a character is when you really think about his rivalry with Yugi. Like, Kaiba outside of dueling isn't a character who really comes off as joyful. Any scene you see of him working at his company, we see him essentially be a joyless husk who's all about business. However, his rivalry with Yugi was probably the best thing that could have happened to him. And I'm not just talking about the mind crush that pretty much separated the darkness from Kaiba's heart. Up until the duel with Yugi, Kaiba was raised to believe that those who lose have no actual worth to their lives, that losing means death, and that this led to him not seeing the actual worth of people, whether they be winners or losers. That isn't to say that he wasn't capable of caring for others before then. He really does care for his brother Mokuba. But back in the manga, Seto was willing to have his own brother suffer a penalty game, the experience of death. Kaiba's defeat at the hands of Yugi, however, started a change for him. The fact of the matter is that for all intents and purposes, Kaiba's mentality was that of a lonely nature. It was a wall that he built up, because weakness and losing was seen as terrible things. It was seen to be like death. Again, his adoptive father burned that thought into his head before he jumped out the window to kill himself. Then Yugi comes along and beats Kaiba, And the reason that Yugi cites that he was able to do so was because of his bonds with his friends. This is literally the antithesis of what Kaiba was taught when he was growing up, and how Kaiba was able to succeed in life. Kaiba doesn't grasp the concept of friendship, and he never really had the chance to do so. His upbringing prevented him from really making any actual bonds with other people, being an orphan and forced to become a cold-hearted CEO. It's through dueling, however, against Yugi that Kaiba begins to understand that the bonds between people isn't a weakness, it's a source of strength. After all, Yugi was able to defeat Kaiba. There had to be something behind Yugi's words. The value of friendship was something that slowly crept into Seto's mind. It doesn't hold you back, it can instead make you a stronger person. Sure, Kaiba denies the heart of the cards all the time, but as I've demonstrated throughout this video with sections from the manga, Kaiba did change and even care for the safety of those dweebs. We need to point something out at this point. I honestly prefer manga Kaiba to anime Kaiba when it comes to the developmental side of things. As much as I enjoy the antics of Kaiba in the anime, the dub and sub anime really skips a lot of important developmental elements to Kaiba's character, skipping past the first part of the actual manga and replacing elements that showed Kaiba's growth. An example would be that point where I talked about Kaiba saving Joey. Yeah, in the anime, it turned out Joey's sister Serenity dove in to get him the key. I understand it was to give the Serenity character something to do other than just being a plot device for Joey, but this choice really hurts Kaiba's characterization. It's why I don't really consider the anime to be canon, so to say. Hell, if anything, I consider it to be more in the same universe as it is with Dark Side of Dimensions. I say this because while it's clearly unconventional and more in line with a rivalry, but it's still a form of friendship that's spread between Kaiba and Yugi/Atem. After all, Kaiba is his most energetic when he's dueling against Yugi. Kaiba's loss gave him a purpose in life. After all, Kaiba essentially already had everything the world could offer. Atem is the only person in the world who could give Kaiba an actual challenge, at least in Kaiba's eyes. And all of that drive, that fire in Kaiba's soul, it gets taken away when Atem loses to Yugi and passes into the afterlife after the ceremonial duel. This event really affected Kaiba and essentially started the events of Dark Side of Dimensions. And Kaiba is willing to spend any amount of money, create new forms of technology, and even break the laws of the natural world to get a chance to duel against Atem and defeat him. Kaiba is a much more complicated character than the public perception would like to think about. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with liking the version of Kaiba that most people are familiar with, the snarky rich boy who can easily screw the rules with money.
It's true. I went to a great deal of trouble recreating the Pharaoh's deck, strategies, even his perfectly coiffed hair. In fact, that part is what took the longest.
But Kaiba's more than that, and it's because of this characterization in the manga and later in Dark Side of Dimensions that really made me appreciate the character development. This guy who basically told Kazuki Takahashi to screw off until they got 10,000 cards grew into one of the most fascinating characters from my childhood. And I'd like to think I'm not the only one who thinks that. Seto Kaiba is probably the gold standard when it comes to rivals. He's iconic, he's got good elements to his backstory that allows him to contrast with the heroes, and most of all, he's not a one note and evolves over the course of Yu-Gi-Oh's story. Is he a perfect character? Nah. But you don't need to be perfect to be great, and besides, even though I said I prefer the manga version over the dub of Kaiba is still pretty damn good.
'Cause I figure, if there is intelligent life out there, then let's teach him how to duel.
I'm not gonna lie, I honestly felt really bad at times when Kaiba should have won some duels against Yugi. Like, we all know it's narrative BS and heart of the cards for the sake of the story, so Yugi has to win, but a lot of the time, Kaiba really felt like he should have won. I don't know, I think that's the inner Kaiba fanboy inside me crying out in despair, wishing that Kaiba actually managed to triumph over the Pharaoh and the heart of the cards BS. But that's just one guy's thoughts over the internet. What about you guys? Do you think Kaiba is a gold standard for rivals? Let me know what your thoughts are down below. I've been really enjoying making these kinds of videos, and I hope that we can keep this sort of thing going for future projects. I got a lot more videos in the works, and I hope you guys can join me in the future. I'm MangaKamen, thanks for watching. Please be sure to leave a like, make sure you're subbed, and with everything else, thank you for your time. Bye-bye!